Hello, folks, and welcome to a special edition of Kudlow. I'm David Asman, in for Larry Kudlow. Well, the human cost of last week's brutal winter storm keeps mounting, leaving at least 30 people dead just in the area around Buffalo alone. 60 people have died across the United States because of the storm. Several of those deaths were caused by people freezing in homes that lost power. But just think of the millions who survived the storm because of the reliability of fossil fuels. Still, Democrats have been determined to eliminate the fossil fuels. Remember when President Biden said the following in November? Roll tape.
We're going to be shutting these plants down all across America and having wind and solar. We're also providing tax credits to help families buy energy-efficient appliances.
And then there was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said that Puerto Rico's blackout in September was, quote, predictable, tweeting out, quote, last year we raised concerns about Puerto Rico's electric grid. More than 4 years after Maria and Irma wiped out power for 70% of the island, the grid was still extremely vulnerable to natural disasters. This weekend's infrastructure failure was tragically predictable, end quote. Well, in the last week, fossil fuels have saved the electric grid and many lives. So why are Democrats demonizing energy companies and pushing so hard to get rid of life-saving fossil fuels? Let's ask Senator John Hoeven of North Dakota, member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator, great to see you. Thank you for being here. You know, as bad as the storm was, can you just imagine what it would be like if President Biden's plans to phase out fossil fuels was put in place today?
That's absolutely right, David. And of course, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and to all your viewers. But, you know, this Arctic bomb cyclone, as they call it, came through. And we saw what we saw last year, and that was problems with the grid and the reliability of the grid for the very reasons that you identified. We need the fossil fuels. We need the base load energy to keep that grid stable at the hottest day in the summer or when we have a storm in the winter.
Now, as I mentioned yesterday, the fact is that we have all these measures in the state of New York against pipelines, against fracking, a permanent ban of fracking. That was put in place in 2020. You have the same thing in California and other blue states. How much of that is putting our grid at risk right now?
It is putting our grid at risk, and it's the stability we talked about. Natural gas, in addition to baseload, that's a good point. New York doesn't allow hydraulic fracturing, and they could be producing a lot of gas out there. They also won't let us build infrastructure out there in terms of the pipelines and the transmission lines that we need to move the energy around. So it's a combination of both, and it goes back to this Green New Deal that the Democrats and Biden are trying to implement. And of course, part of that strategy is to drive up the price of fossil fuels to push people away from them. But as you can see what happens, we end up with supply shortages.
And in the wintertime, there really isn't much that's more effective than fossil fuels. Perhaps nuclear energy could be as well. But the fossil fuels, I mean, you think of what would happen if you relied, I mean, we've seen what happens when you rely just on wind power alone. We saw that in Texas. Obviously, solar power doesn't work too well if you don't have the batteries to save up that energy. So, I mean, we can't make that major transition that Biden keeps talking about right now, can we?
David, there's so many ways we can talk about this. You want to talk about inflation? One of the biggest drivers of inflation is the cost of energy,
sure
right?
It is.
Green New Deal is pushing up the cost of energy, so it's driving up inflation. Now you want to talk about reliability of the grid. We had 500,000 people without power on Christmas Eve. There's no excuse for that. There's no reason for that other than the Biden Democrat Green New Deal taking gas out of the mix because we can't produce that energy here at home, or the things we're talking about, base load for the grid, whether it's coal-fired electric like we produce up here in North Dakota. And we're decarbonizing that coal, by the way. We are engaging in carbon capture and sequestration. So we'll address that issue, but we need that base load, whether it's coal, whether it's nuclear. We need the energy, whether it's gas and oil, all these things. But we can do that with the best environmental stewardship if Biden would take the handcuffs off our energy producers and let us produce that energy here at home, which we can do.
But they're belittling all of the things that you just mentioned, all of those things, the sequestration of carbon, et cetera. They say it's all phony. You can't have any kind of clean energy from fossil fuels at all. And then they demonize the fossil fuel industry. In fact, Jorn Lomborg, who's reminds us that most of the deaths from cold or heat come from cold. We have 9 times more deaths in the world from cold than from heat. That amounts to over 4 million people. So we really need the fossil fuels when it starts getting cold outside. But he says cheap and reliable energy to keep us warm used to be the hallmark of prosperous countries. No more because of our climate obsession. So that's what you're up against.
But again, there's so many aspects to it, not just the lives that are lost. You mentioned up to 30 lives now as a result of this Arctic bomb cyclone. Think of the national security implications. Look what's happening with Ukraine and with Russia cutting off energy supplies. Look at the impact with inflation because of energy costs. All these things are a result of this Green New Deal when we could be producing far more energy here at home. And again, let's go back to the environmental stewardship piece. Nobody does it better than we do, meaning with better environmental stewardship. In the case of coal, David, we have solved SOx, NOx, mercury, all these different emissions. Now we're reducing the CO2 footprint dramatically as well. So again, take the handcuffs off, let American ingenuity step in here. We will not only be energy secure, we will be energy dominant.
By the way, we have a lot fewer CO2 emissions now than we did 10 years ago as a result of switching to natural gas. But, you know, it's not, the activists have been on the march, and not only in government. Of course, you have the new regulations from SEC concerning ESG, all of the woke policies. But you also have these corporate boards that are filled with woke activists who are trying to prevent any kind of financing of fossil fuel programs, exploration and exploitation of fossil fuels. So how much is that stopping our energy independence or moving even further away from it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very significant issue as well. The whole ESG thing, which restricts financing, drives up the cost of financing. Combine that with the moratorium on producing energy on federal lands, both onshore and off, the lack of permitting, the administration is holding up permitting, the litigation, all those things not only reduce the supply, but they drive up the cost of energy at a time when people are fighting inflation. And on these cold, we're going to have more of these storms, you know that.
Yeah.
And again, it's a life and death issue. And again, national security, again, there's so many aspects to this where we need to get back to the kind of rational energy policy that empowers energy production in this country.
By the way, there is some positive news in terms of the whole ESG push by corporate boards and by the SEC. States are suing now those banks that refuse to finance fossil fuel projects, particularly those states that are producing it themselves, and they're winning, and they're stopping a lot of these companies, a lot of these finance companies from doing business and costing them billions of dollars. That must be having an effect on their bottom line.
Right, and we're trying to push back through CRA, the Congressional Review Act. I was just on talking to Larry not that long ago. We talked about how now the Biden administration is trying to impose its Green New Deal in terms of the military and their ability to secure their weapon systems rather than focusing, again, on what's best for our men and women in uniform to make sure that they can always win the fight. Across the board, we have to try to push back on these, whether it's legislation or whether it's knocking down these regulations or, as you say, through the courts.
Senator, I got to ask you one question on the omnibus bill, because I know you weren't a supporter of it, but of course a lot of Republicans were, and that's how it got through the Senate. I'm just wondering how Republicans can get back their reputation, which had already been in tatters from previous bailouts and such. How can they get it back as being the party of fiscal responsibility after signing on to this bill?
We've got to find ways to reduce the spending and get spending reform, get our debt and deficit under control. And as you say, I was one that really advocated and continued. I was against the omnibus, felt we had to get into the next Congress, link up with the Republican majority in the House, and fight to get not only spending reduction, but budget reform. And we've just got to do that.
But didn't this set a precedent for going along, just going along to get along, that idea, as though somehow that's good for the American public?
Well, I think for those that voted for it, they felt that the House would have a harder time getting a budget and would have to get Democrats involved. I don't agree with that. I felt we needed to get a short-term CR, get into the next session of Congress, and work with the House to get that spending reform and reduce spending now.
All right, it's going to take a lot of convincing to convince Americans that fiscal responsibility is alive and well in the Republican Party, but thankfully you're part of the party that's doing the work in that regard. Good to see you, Senator. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.